So, Mr. Rhodes, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Good to be with you.
What does this White House hope to achieve through President Xi's upcoming state visit?
First of all, it's very important to us that we have regular high-level contacts with China. It's the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world, and we feel that engagement is the best way to advance the relationship. So what we hope to achieve is find areas of concrete progress where we can move forward on climate and energy policy. I think we can set a good example going into the Paris talks later this year. On economic issues, I think we want to find ways to promote more Chinese investment in the United States, pursue policies that can create growth and jobs in both countries, but then also deal with some irritants in our relationship on cyber issues, on the South China Sea. So there's a very broad agenda. We want to leave here with the relationship in a stronger footing than it was when we came in, and demonstrate to the world that the U.S. and China are committed to working together on the issues that are going to shape the future of the 21st century.
You were with the president pretty much since the very beginning, and you were present for virtually all of the summits between the President Xi and President Obama. According to your observation, what kind of personal relationships have come out of the meetings between President Xi and President Obama?
So my observation would be we started this relationship really as they were presidents at Sunnylands, explicitly so they could have some time, not in a formal setting, but to have extended private conversations. And what I've noticed since then is the most productive sessions that they have tend to be the least scripted, most private times to have a conversation. So when we were in Beijing recently, I think the most constructive conversation they had was over the private dinner. Because it wasn't just a long agenda. The two of them could share their worldviews, they could speak candidly about where they were trying to move their respective countries. And I think they've established a type of relationship where they can get beyond just the long list of issues that we have to discuss and step back and give each other the context that they're each dealing with as leaders of such important and powerful countries.
Right, moving on to some specific issues, New York Times reported Sunday that this administration is trying to negotiate a deal with the Chinese side on a cyber code of conduct. Can you confirm that report?
Yes, what we're trying to do is say on cyber issues, there are always going to be tensions, there's always going to be, frankly, some degree of espionage that is taking place in the world. What we're most focused on is trade secrets and the ability of businesses to operate without the fear that they're going to be subjected to cyber attacks that steal their intellectual property. So what we've been talking to China about is how can we create the type of framework where we can cooperate on these issues and we can be more transparent. And if we have a concern, we can raise it directly with our Chinese counterparts and know that there'll be follow-up. And I'm sure the Chinese, of course, would have the ability to raise issues with us. So I wouldn't say that there's some formal agreement that has been reached, but I do think that we've had a constructive discussion about what does that framework look like. How can we address these issues not purely as competitors, but also as two countries that have a stake in a world in which businesses can operate without fear that their secrets are going to be stolen by cyber actors.
So will the U.S.-China Cyber Working Group be resumed?
Well, we would hope so. We would hope that there can be mechanisms for dialogue like that working group.
On law enforcement cooperation, recently one high-profile Chinese corruption suspect, Yang Jingjun, was repatriated back to China. What prompted the White House, the U.S., to do that?
Well, look, whenever we're in a law enforcement situation with other countries, we are open to receiving information that requests extradition. And our law enforcement community reviews that information, and then they make a determination about whether or not it's sufficient to lead to repatriation. We don't get involved in that. So in our system, the White House, State Department, we don't make those judgments. This is handled entirely by the Department of Justice, the FBI, and they have a liaison relationship with China and with many other countries where they can say, if you have a concern about an individual, you share the information with us, and if we believe it's sufficient, then we're willing to cooperate with you.
So for the U.S. to repatriate more of the corruption suspects, as was requested by the Chinese side, they will have to do it on a case-by-case basis?
That's exactly right. This would be a case-by-case basis. where the Justice Department will have to receive the information, and then they will make an independent determination, separate from the White House, about whether the information is credible enough to require repatriation.
On climate change, can we expect a new deal?
Well, I think what we can expect is advances on the deal that was reached in China. That deal set a foundation for our respective targets that we'll be bringing into Beijing, bringing into Paris. But I think there's more work that can be done in terms of clean energy cooperation and in terms of the implementation of those climate targets that can add further momentum as we head into Paris. So I think you will see additional statements, additional details about how we want to move this forward, building off of the foundation of what we announced last year in Beijing. And the objective is the whole world is going to be watching this summit. There's a huge opportunity at the end of the year in Paris to reach a global agreement to combat climate change. Everybody knows the US and China are the two biggest emitters. We set the tone in many ways. And so we want to send a very positive message to the world that we're advancing this agenda together.
So Mr. Rose, it's not just in China proposed by the Chinese senior leadership, but here in the Western political science world, people are asking this question. Can the US and China create a new pattern of major power politics that somehow avoids the inevitable clash between a rising and established power?
We would like the answer to be yes. We've said we welcome the rise of a peaceful and prosperous China. I think you look at it in three categories. One, what are we doing bilaterally together that benefits both of our countries? And our economic relationship in many ways holds out the promise of benefiting each country, of creating jobs, creating growth, fostering investment, even as there are going to be irritants along the way. Two, what are we doing in the world? And this is something President Obama is focused on. As China plays a greater role, as China has more resources, can we find areas of cooperation? If you look at the Iran deal, that couldn't have happened without US-China cooperation. Climate change is not going to be successful in terms of Paris without US-China cooperation. We're exploring ways for the US and China to cooperate on development issues so we can take our partnership global and in a constructive way. At the same time, I think where there's competition, where there's difficulty, is on certain issues like cyber, which I mentioned, where we want to make sure that China is invested in clear rules of the road, and areas like the South China Sea, where we've been concerned about the militarization of a space that is critical to the global economy. We want to make sure, not as a claimant, but as a party that depends a lot on the South China Sea, that there are peaceful ways of resolving these territorial disputes. And so it's not about so much trying to contain China or stop China's rise. It's about trying to help ensure that as China rises, as China succeeds, they can become a key supporter of a global system of international law, international rules of the road, that can help resolve disputes on maritime, on trade, on cyber, just as they've been constructive on issues like climate change and nonproliferation.
And very finally, would you push for the president at NSC to ask the US to join the AIIB by the end of this administration?
Well, I think that's something that we're still looking at. We are very comfortable with the existing international monetary institutions, the IMF, the World Bank. We frankly sought to ensure that countries like China can play a greater role in those institutions given their emerging role in the world. We understand a lot of countries have joined the AIIB. We support the notion that there has to be greater investment in infrastructure in Asia that will help facilitate development. We do have a set of standards that we think multilateral financial institutions should abide by. And that's the nature of our dialogue with China. How can we ensure that when you talk about transparency, when you talk about how these institutions operate, how can we ensure that the AIIB is up to those high standards? And that's the way in which we'll evaluate our relationship with the AIIB going forward.
Thank you very much.